Peter, General Motors hopefully coming into Formula One in 2026 and beyond with Mario Andretti's team, Michael's team as well. But as you point out in the book, General Motors very much involved in your active program with Ayrton Senna in '87, indeed winning Monaco and Detroit with the General Motors program behind it, correct?
It was funded. Team Lotus got sponsorship from Lotus Engineering or Group Lotus, I can't remember which, but they're the same thing, to add active suspension to the '87 car. But by that time, General Motors owned Group Lotus. So who was paying for that program?
Yeah.
And Bob Eaton was quite a motor racing fan.
Brilliant. I love the story, and I've got to ask you to tell it again, of the mixing of the fluids. I think it was in Brazil.
It was in Brazil. I've vivid recollections
hydraulic. I mean, let's start with the reaction of the Honda engineers when things didn't go quite right from their perspective.
We had a problem is we were blowing up the seal into the hydraulic pump, which was driven on the back of the camshaft of the Honda V6 turbo engine. And just because it was mounted on the back of the cylinder head, when the seal failed, the hydraulic oil squirted into the engine at high pressure and filled up the engine, which Honda was not impressed by. It was the hydraulic fluid was a military aircraft hydraulic fluid, which had very, very poor lubricity. It didn't lubricate the things it was working with particularly well. And basically, that was a showstopper for the active suspension car. And we were in Brazil, where it's quite difficult to do development, and we fairly incentivized to come up with a solution to allow us to go on running the car and developing it. And David Williams and I said, well, we've got loads of oils in the garage. We've got gearbox oils, we've got engine oils, we've got all sorts of stuff. Surely we can just add a bit to the hydraulic fluid to make it lubricate. And we lined up all the oils and mixed small percentages into the hydraulic fluid and then did that with it and went, yeah, that feels quite good. Yeah, that's not bad. But we were also worried about whether if it got hot, it might produce sort of varnishes or ash or something. So we took a little tin lid or jar lid, put some of this oil in it, and heated it from underneath and saw what happened when it disappeared, what residue did it leave. And the Honda engineers they didn't criticize, but they were a bit nonplussed by what we were doing. And we found that the Neo oil used in the gearbox, which is a fantastic oil, had really good lubricity in a small quantity. So we said, right, here's the oil for the hydraulic system. And it worked. And Honda then developed an oil for use in hydraulic pumps attached to their engine, basically. But that's what you did in those days. You didn't have 500 people back home to solve the problem.
No, I mean, a perfect solution.
Yeah,
absolutely. Probably would have taken 6 months and 500 people in today's world.
Yeah, neat.
Force majeure.
I was just going to say that's the sort of engineering I love. I was brought up with it.
Yeah.
You solve it on the spot.
What was Colin Chapman's attitude to computers and the changing world? And as an adjunct to that, do you think I'm presuming he loved it, and do you think he would embrace all the technology that we have today?
Reluctantly. He realized undoubtedly, through my sort of interaction with him over active suspension, he knew it was coming. He knew it was essential. He realized the power of it. It wasn't his thing. And in fact, his son-in-law, Patrick Peel, gave him and set up for him a Sinclair computer and set it all up with a TV monitor and what have you. And Colin gave it back to Patrick a week later. He knew it was important. It wasn't his thing. But I think he would have embraced it. I mean, his reaction to get needing resources put into active suspension was extraordinary.
Another very important point you make, which I either had completely forgotten it or I never knew it in the first place, was that Ferrari actually messed it up for themselves by not protesting the sliding skirts on Harvey Postlethwaite's Wolf at Monaco, and therefore the floodgates were open to effectively to movable aerodynamic devices and the grey area around them. And because you quite studiously had been at Lotus, had been building legal skirts, but all of a sudden the Wolf changed everything, correct?
Well, they were sort of legal. That's where Colin got very, very involved. And the hinge polypropylene, the machined hinge in polypropylene, was on the basis that it didn't move, it just flexed. What Harvey produced was a board that flopped up and down inside a box with a spring to hold it down. And Colin said, no, that's illegal. But when it was allowed, it was so obviously the right solution that we had to follow suit.
But then that opened up other doors of misunderstanding. And certainly for Ferrari, it gave them a difficult problem to solve when it came to the banning of skirts and everything else, because...
Well, I think I got really thinking back over time, I think the FIA missed an enormous opportunity to deal with the whole aerodynamic issue at that time. They could quite easily have stomped on it, but I don't think they properly understood it. So they, guided by Ferrari, they fiddled at the edges.
Yeah.
Whereas really it needed something much more fundamental to deal with it. Because I don't think large amounts of downforce of it really improved motor racing. I mean, we can't do without them now, but I don't think there was an opportunity to keep motor racing purer and more relevant back in the late 70s, and it was missed.
And you make the point very accurately that as a result of that, suspension systems ever since have been compromised.
Well, I was thinking the other day, we still have porpoising. We discovered porpoising in 1979 with the Type 80. 45 years later, we still got it, which is bloody nonsense, really.
That means there is no ultimate solution, correct? But as we say, the suspension is inadequate for the job that we require it to do.
Yeah, but not, active suspension was the answer. The 88 wasn't the answer. That was a contraption, but it was too early for a computer-controlled suspension. Plan B was sort of underway when the 88 saga was at full flight. And active suspension, if you look at it now, all the bits you need and all the technology is available on a current Formula One car. Making an active suspension would be a piece of cake. It wouldn't be expensive, wouldn't be complicated. And we proved in 83 that it dealt with porpoising. It's the right solution, is you want the suspension to have more than one function. Like a human, it's exactly like a human. We're a load carrier and we're a suspension system, a road irregularity device. They've got totally different required characteristics, and because they're computer controlled by the brain, they can have totally independent characteristics. And that's what you needed for a car with a large amount of downforce that was dependent on the road, the attitude relative to the road. So that could all have been solved. It would have saved a lot more money than it could ever possibly have cost to not have porpoising in the last 20 years.
Well, absolutely clear. And I'm sure most current Formula One engineers, if they thought about it, would agree with you.
Yeah.
The problem, it's an interesting point now, isn't it? How some teams have been able to get more or less on top of it not every race, but more or less, and others can't. Is that a question of some of them just got more downforce and the teams with less downforce have less of an issue? I mean, how do you rationalize the difference between the slow and the fast cars today in Formula One?
I think it's if you haven't got an active suspension to solve the problem, it's a very, very complicated problem. And it requires very sophisticated modeling, because there are two elements of it that are probably the least understood parts of a Formula One car. One is the aerodynamics, particularly the dynamic characteristics of the aerodynamics, the information for which is really only derived in a wind tunnel. And I think there's been quite a lot recently about how wind tunnels don't perfectly simulate the effect of the ground. And the other is, of course, the tire, which is still, black magic.
Yeah. Well, more so than in a long time, because there's no reason for Pirelli to go too far into it anyway, because they've got a monopoly. But
no,
Peter, just pursuing that, though, why do you think Mercedes, who arguably would have had the best modeling systems of all the Formula One teams, in relative terms, had more trouble and still have more trouble in getting it right than Red Bull, Ferrari, or McLaren?
Dealing with porpoising is very, very complicated. I think I've said before, it's the nearest thing is flutter in aircraft, which is an aero-elastic phenomena where the aerodynamic characteristics and the flexing, the elastic characteristics, work together to produce a particular characteristics. And aircraft, it's quite recent that aircrafts have stopped failing from flutter. And if you fly an aircraft too fast in a dive, it flutters and disintegrates. I think it is a very, very complicated problem. I don't know why Red Bull has got it so right. Maybe they have a characteristic in their car somewhere which allows them to sort the problem or control the problem, or just make it slightly better and run the car at a higher downforce level.
We have so-called active aerodynamics coming into the new cars for 2026. Do you think that's going to help things along?
I don't think so. They will only effectively be allowed to have sort of more than one setting. They won't be truly active. They'll be variable. So I don't think they will react and change wing angle or whatever in response to the motion of the car. They'll do it in response to speed or something, which means that at high speed, the car won't get so low at very high speed when the downforce is greater. I think it may allow it to run at higher downforce levels at low and medium speeds. That's the biggest bit. And of course, it'll reduce the drag on the straight when you don't need downforce.
Changing the subject completely, 1980 Austrian Grand Prix, Nigel Mansell making his debut. I don't know whether I've misread it in the book, but it looks like there's a bit of a revelation there that it wasn't a fuel tank leak and the car was just overfilled. Is that right?
We were topping it up on the line, and we had the way they used to be topped up on the line was to have the filler was at the top of the tank, and you had a reservoir on quite a long tubular tower, so that you could put a bit of head on filling the fuel tank, which always causes the car to take more fuel. The more pressure you can put in it, the more fuel it takes. And I can't really remember, we must have been tight on fuel. So the idea was, well, get the car to the grid, do its warm-up lap, and then pressurize the tank with as much fuel as you can get in. And because it's something which you can't do now for very good reasons, because you end up with pouring fuel into the cockpit on top of the driver, which we did.
And this is a stupid question, but Nigel knew that then at the start of the race. Were his overalls wet, or did you try to keep the whole thing away from his brain?
No, he was aware because he was sitting in a puddle of fuel, which is why his buttocks became blistered. But the pain wouldn't have gotten started until quite a few laps in.
Right. Okay. Moving on. You make the point that when you were developing the active car first time round, that there were not enough Renault engines to run 2 Renault turbo cars. So on the Cosworth car, you ran the active suspension, right?
Yes, that was the deal that we were presented with. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. But would you have run the active car had you had enough Renault engines for both cars? Would you have run an active Renault, is what I'm getting around to saying? Turbo?
I can't answer that. I mean, it was a very complicated time. Colin died literally on the day that we first ran an active Grand Prix car. So it was very unknown technology. The decision to race the Cosworth car as an active car hadn't been made at that stage. Colin died, so the decision lay with Peter Wright, and I don't know what the answer would have been. I think it was a very, very confusing time. I was just obviously keen to see it run because I wanted to know if it worked.
Yeah.
And we got to run it.
We're talking about the Lotus 88.
Yes.
Was that not also along the way? Was that not also a way of getting around the 6 centimeter ride height rule as well? Or
Oh,
not?
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you don't actually mention that benefit in the book. And I'm surprised that you didn't mention that because I always assumed that was one of its raison d'etre, actually.
Well, our first car was the Type 86.
Yeah.
Which was the Type 81 aluminium monocoque in which we built a prototype Type 88 to see whether we could do it. Martin Ogilvie and I got tucked up in a room up the top of Ketchingham Hall to do the project, to keep it secret. And that car ran once in Harama and showed enough promise for Colin to say, right, let's go ahead. And then, but we need to sort out the monocoque, and that led Martin to develop the Type 88 carbon fiber monocoque. He took a piece of the undertray of the 86 and bent it till the inner skin collapsed. And he went, oh, we were trying to see how it broke, how it failed. And when it broke, he went, I can see a way of making a monocoque out of this stuff. And Colin, of course, being a great advocate of composite, said, yes, right, go. Then Ferrari got wind of what we were doing, or something of what we were doing, and thought we were building a car without a suspension. And Ferrari had to go at the FIA. The FIA came up with a rule that said the car's got to have a suspension, and at the same time, basically banned skirts, because the 86 ran with a full set of skirts. But once skirts were banned, we went, oh, crikey, we've designed the car that has the solution to this new rule, because it will lower itself without compromising anything else to produce the smallest possible gap. And of course, Gordon Murray did the same thing with the whole car. He built in a lowering system. So yes, but it was quite late in the day before we realized what we had. And we had no choice but to build the car.
And I remember Colin saying, and isn't it wonderful that the plural of chassis is chassis?
Yes, yes. I mean, that was a nonsense. The lengths to which various people went to make sure we couldn't run the car was untrue. I mean, to the point of producing new rules that were worded wrong and allowed us to go on running it.
That's the problem when you try to ban something that is legal, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm quite sure it's legal. All the lawyers who got involved all said, yes, this meets the wording of the regulations.
Yeah, well,
including Lord Shawcross.
Yeah, who had some road done by him, let's face it, the Nuremberg trials.
Exactly.
In that little office upstairs in your book, I didn't know this, but Jimmy Stewart, the American actor, had been based there in World War II. Wow.
He was commandant at Hethel.
Yeah, what an amazing thing. I mean, did you get to see where he'd sat and how he operated and what it was like? Were there any relics left from that period?
No, it had been a school since he was there.
Ah, what a shame.
A boarding school.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think there was much legacy apart from the ghost. I don't think there was a legacy of it. when the 88 was banned, it was a gut punch to comment that, because it said you cannot innovate in Formula One.
Yeah.
And he said, that's why I'm in it. He said, I would give up right now Formula One racing if I hadn't made a commitment to John Players. And he basically kind of lost interest in Formula One for a little while, and aeroplanes were what he put where his efforts, his emotions and design expertise were applied.